Welcome to Real Talk with Real Taxpayers, where we stay awake in a world that wants you asleep. I spent 7 years pretending to be fine while deep down drowning in a quiet depression, and then COVID hit, and one night I overdosed and died. And that should have been the end of my story, but somewhere in that wreckage, I met God, and that's the story I'm going to share with y'all today. But before we jump in, my name's Andriy. Welcome to Real Talk with Real Taxpayers. On this podcast, we're going to be diving into topics, everything from life after death to aliens, conspiracy theories, flow state, and all of the other lighthearted topics that are just a little bit too real and too raw for LinkedIn and Facebook. I have a lot of plans for the future episodes and for guests, and I just want to facilitate an environment where we can be real about the stuff that is actually interesting. I thought about it for a long time, and I wanted at first to have this first episode have a guest on it, but I have a powerful story to share about my experience. And after a lot of thought, I decided it wouldn't be fair to deprive that attention from a guest. And this is a story that I've kind of shared bits and pieces of over the years, but I've never actually shared the full story. And this is going to be the first time, and I think it's finally time. So the story takes me back 4 years ago. This was right on the start of COVID. Leading up to this, I've spent many years in a depression where I felt everything from feelings of unworthiness to just overall unhappiness. I was just not happy. And I was on a journey of trying to find what would make me happy and content in this life. And COVID hit, and I lost my job. I lost my business. I lost my income, and, cooped up in an apartment with nothing but my thoughts and, chain smoking vapes and nicotine and waking and baking from morning till night. I spent many months and about a full year just reading all kinds of psychology books and diving, numbing myself with video games and drugs and unhealthy food, and, really trying to dig inside of myself to find why I wasn't happy. And one night while inside of my apartment, I was just kind of pacing around, and the craziest thing happened out of nowhere, no preparation, no nothing, just absolutely in an instant, God came into my life and overwhelmed me. In one instant like this, 150 pounds were lifted from me, and every sin, every burden I've ever carried instantly forgiven and gone. And I was so overwhelmed with emotion. So many emotions at the same time, feelings of unworthiness, disbelief, awe, all the hairs on my skin stood up, and I just couldn't believe it. And being the cynical skeptic that I am, the first articulable thought that came into my mind was, if this is really you, God, then you're going to have to give me better proof than that. And up to that moment, I didn't really believe in God. I wanted to. I spent my whole life wanting to, but I didn't really know. And the moment I thought that thought, true story, a lightning strike like lightning just flashed outside so bright that it lit up my entire apartment, and all of the hair on my skin stood up, and I was overwhelmed by I felt the power of God in that moment. And immediately after that flash, which almost blinded me and lit up my whole apartment, a very thick rain started to fall, like from 0 to 100. And I just felt that was God crying, and I collapsed on my couch, and I just sat there and cried for hours while God held me. And that was crazy, because up till that moment, I can't even tell you how many years it was since I cried at all. And I just sat there for hours crying and while Jesus held me. And I could feel the frustration that God had with me over the years, and the frustration I had with God over the years. And in that one moment, I went from wanting to believe in God to undoubtedly just understanding that not only was he real, but he's been in my life this whole time. And I went from wanting to be a believer to just in an instant understanding that my soul was immortal and that God was there. And you know, I wish I could tell you that I 100% right away 180'd my life in that moment, but I didn't. And a couple days after I experienced that, I smoked some kind of weed that was laced with something that really, I don't know if that's or the combination of all those experiences together, but it completely started to peel open my third eye. And for 3 days there, I lived in what I would describe as heaven on earth. If y'all have seen the movie Limitless, that is literally what I experienced. All the predetermined shackles and confinements and barriers and boundaries that I have placed on myself, society has placed on myself up to that point in my life, instantly gone. And the world was my oyster, and anything that I could possibly imagine or conceptualize with my mind was possible. And literally, quite like the limitless pill, it felt like I had access to, for the first time, not a small percentage of my brain, but 100% of my brain. And I'll be honest, I abused that and was a little greedy with that newly found awakened power, if that's what you'd want to call it. And my brain was racing and solving every single problem and question that I've ever had in my life. For the first time, it was crazy because I had access to subconscious thoughts and memories that I didn't even remember before then, but I could access them and analyze every bit of information that I've come across my whole life. And my, having the crazy brain that I do, my brain's didn't know what to grab onto. So I started to grab onto a lot of ideas, how to facilitate world peace. And my brain is working subconsciously towards an answer for that. Why am I not happy? And the path in my life, and my brain's working towards that, all the way to E equals MC squared, and a formula that I honestly didn't really even understand until that point. Even on a conceptual level, my brain had worked out the answer to. And as I'm going through this, I'm in a little bit of a state of disbelief, because obviously this sounds pretty crazy. And so I started reaching out to a lot of smart people in my life and kind of testing some of these theories, or, having them validate, am I crazy? Have I just lost my mind? Or is this really something that I'm onto? And I had multiple people validate multiple experiences that I had. And I just lived in a euphoric state for a couple days. But that's where the catch was. My brain was so fired up, and I didn't realize this at the time. Obviously, we have a lot more foresight in hindsight, or we see a lot more in hindsight, but my brain was overheating quite literally like a computer would overheat. And 3 days had gone by, and I literally did not sleep at all. And I went from this euphoric feeling and experiencing what you would describe as literally heaven on earth, where you just walk through any door and nothing is impossible and you feel powerful. And in those 3 days, like I remember I walked into the bathroom one of those days and just caught a glimpse of myself in my mirror. And yes, I have blue eyes, but my eyes were like sapphire blue, like just glowing. And I looked at myself and I almost didn't recognize myself. And I felt a very powerful, I think for the first time ever, I felt the power of the full potential of my soul. And it was incredible. It just literally felt like I could do anything in this world. But that feeling would soon come to an end, because, like I said, 3 days from that experience, I didn't sleep at all. And my brain started to overheat to the point where I started getting worried, because I'm feeling tension and pressure, here in my brain, and it won't stop, and I can't slow it down, and it's moving and going. And I remember one day I literally submerged myself in a bathtub of ice water. I didn't realize the severity of what was going on with me at the time. And, fast forward, that turned into 3 days of what I would describe as hell on earth. And all that bliss and joy turned into darkness. And I was very scared. And in those following 3 days, what I would say is all of my preconceived walls And kind of the walls and the barriers that I've built up and society has built up within me over the, since I was maybe 5 years old, because we kind of, as we lose that innocence and as a kid, you start very slowly, day after day, month after month, year after year, building up barriers and walls and ego defense mechanisms and perceptions. And in the next 3 days, every single one of those barriers was shattered. And it was much like seeing the world for the first time behind the curtain. And it was very scary because the world as we know it or perceive it is, in a large sense, very fake and very vain and very plastic and very dark. And it was for the first time in my life that I was looking at the world and seeing it through a whole different filter, and it terrified me. It terrified me, the amount of corruption and greed and power and fakeness and everything that was there. And I couldn't unsee these things. And I started, everything from the world itself to the symbolism behind that, while at the same time my brain's working and I can't stop this computer anymore. And now I'm getting worried because it's overheating to the point where, like, if I don't fall asleep, I'm going to die, but I can't fall asleep. And I lived through 3 days of progressively worsening state where at this point I'm borderline hallucinating because of the lack of sleep and the brain computing. And on that third day of the hell cycle, although I've had so many epiphanies, I literally died on my couch. And I could feel I had a blood vessel pop right here, and I felt it pop, and I died on my couch. And what I saw on the other side terrified me because I saw what I would describe as hell. I literally woke up in what you would call a Matrix style hospital bed, where I looked to the left and right and there's just thousands of beds and thousands, as far as my eyes could see, people hooked up to machines, not quite like the Matrix where you're encapsulated, but you're literally in a hospital bed and you're hooked up and getting fed through it and everything through it. And you're in government induced coma where, the world as we know it is gone. And this is the reality that, you're on this bed and you're plugged into this fake world of a Matrix. And when I woke up, my mom was at my side and she was crying and begging me to go back to sleep, because if I didn't go back to sleep and didn't comply with this government Matrix thing, then they would pull the plug on both of us. And that was terrifying. And the person I was seeing at the time, didn't know what else to do, but, I came back in and, finally came back to life. And I don't know how long I was gone, but that moment felt like a very long moment. And I just asked her to drive me to my parents' house, which was 2 hours away. And she literally rushed me to the car and we set off on the road. And during this drive, I'm fading in and out of life and death. And during this drive, as I'm fading out, I'm hearing the beeping of the hospital machines and it's terrifying me. And I'm fighting on the inside because, a part of me is terrified and doesn't want to die. And a part of me is terrified because to live would mean to willingly go back into what I thought at the time would be the Matrix, this world, which is knowing that I'm going to be asleep in this hospital bed, living this fake life. And those were the two choices I perceived I had in front of me at that time. And it terrified me and I couldn't go back to sleep, but something inside of me didn't want to let go and die. And so I was caught in this weird limbo. And as I got delivered to my parents' house, I struggled for multiple days in this weird limbo. And finally, maybe on day 8 or 9, I was able to sleep for a couple hours. And this entire experience just shattered everything inside of me and peeled back every layer. And it was terrifying. And I was a shell of the person I was. And I remember, I crawled out of bed on one of these mornings and I just looked at myself in the mirror and I didn't realize the thing that was looking back at me anymore. I was some 105-pound, frail, sickly looking shell of a person. And I had really hit rock bottom, lost all my business, lost all my money, lost everything that was important to me, that I thought was important to me at the time. And I still couldn't quiet or slow down my brain. And I had that kind of limitless capacity or access to what I would say is seeing the matrix behind the perception of what we see for about 3 months. And I had to very meticulously and very painstakingly put together brick after brick of my shattered life and my shattered existence. And I had to slow down my brain. And the only way I was able to do that was through meditating and getting into a state where I could literally lower the temperature of my brain so it didn't overheat. I was so shattered to the point where if I would look at a cell phone, I could feel like it felt like looking in, like putting my head over a fireplace where you could feel the fumes and the heat and just like this rush from the screen. And, in hindsight, it's crazy how many barriers we built up even between us and technology. But since those barriers were gone, the feeling of that was so much intensified. And I didn't realize how much noise was between us and God and us and our inner voice. And once all that noise is removed, I was able to listen to the internal me and hear my soul and hear my inner voice and hear God. And it was just an insane experience for me. And that was, what I think about this in hindsight is, and what it feels like in hindsight is almost like I was walking in this maze through life where God was trying to steer me in the right direction. And I just kept running away and kept running into dead end after dead end after dead end. And, I literally totaled 3 cars and 2 of them drunk behind the wheel. And thank God I didn't hurt anybody other than myself during that. But the second that experience literally landed me in a night in jail with a broken sternum and a broken foot. That's a story for another day. But even that didn't wake me up. And it took literally losing my life and seeing hell to finally snap me awake in this world. And I think it's crazy because it's crazy and beautiful that such a negative experience could start me on this path towards happiness and light and growth and positivity. And there's nothing negative that has come out of that experience in my life. That was something that I needed to live through because I was so far away and so far there was so much noise between me and my inner voice and God that was what it took to finally wake me up in this world. And it's crazy because in that moment when God came into my life and I experienced what I would describe as a sacrament of reconciliation and forgiveness in that moment, and still felt so unworthy to even experience that. In that moment, I had a flashback to when I was 5 years old and I was playing in my grandparents' house. And believe this or not, but I was running around and this was in Ukraine and I ran into my grandparents. It was kind of funny because they had like the old house, which they built themselves, which was like a bedroom and a living room / kitchen. And then, over the years, as the family grew, my grandpa built an addition onto the house, which was basically a second house and then connected the two with a hallway. So we'd call them the old house and the new house. And I ran into the old house and to the living room / kitchen. My grandma was very religious. So there was, the typical Eastern Orthodox like portraits, one of Mary and one of Jesus. And I run into this room and I looked up I just glanced up to the portrait and Mary was in full conversation with me. And I just froze because I was looking at her and she was looking at me and her mouth was moving, but no words, no sound, nothing. And she was talking and I just froze, mesmerized in that instance. And she was saying something to me and I just couldn't hear anything. And I was so just rattled that I immediately ran to my grandma and I'm like, stuttering. I'm like, they're talking the port, and she's like, what is going on? And I dragged her into the room. And of course, as I showed her the portraits, normal, not moving, not talking, just portraits. And I was very young, but that memory never left me, because obviously no one believed me, and this was, I was just a kid, imagination and stuff, but that memory shook me so much that it never left me. And in that moment that God came into my life, that memory flashed before my eyes, and all of those words that I didn't know what they meant poured into my soul in that moment. And God talked to me through those words and unlocked that memory in me. And that was, I don't know if that's what I needed to experience as a cynic that I am to actually believe that was God intervening in my life, but I don't know how else to explain what happened to me. And I don't know what shy of that it would have taken to get a guy like me to actually not want to believe in God, but to understand and believe in that moment that God existed. And obviously I don't think that was accidental. And I to this day, I feel feelings of unworthiness and still some feelings of the unknown of what exactly my mission is and what God wants me to do on this earth. But I know part of that mission is sharing this story. And somehow I know that through the journey and through this journey, I'm going to discover more and more puzzle pieces of what I am meant to do in this world. But yeah, that's a story that shook me awake. That's a story that gave me a peek behind the scenes of the Matrix. And through this journey, I learned all about flow state and how to tap into that and how to listen to your soul. And it really opened a whole nother universe in this world for me. And it allowed me to connect with some incredible people and really understand life at a much deeper level that I've ever understood it. And I want to use this platform and this podcast to connect with people that might have similar stories or that have similar experiences. And I want to hear what they extracted from this and how it changed their life and how they operate differently because of that. I really shouldn't even be here today, but I am. And I hope that if anything, this story shows you that even a person that feels like they're completely unworthy at a deep, dark part in their life, it's not hopeless. There's always hope, and God is literally always there, 1 millisecond away with the door open, ready to embrace you and welcome you. And, as I think about my experience and I try to imagine, this God and what, Jesus and what an infinite being would be. And when I imagine infinity, to me, God is infinity and infinite knowledge and infinite love and infinite goodness. And, with that goodness is also the badness. And I think I went through this experience on purpose. One of the things that I extracted from this experience is that I really think there's a light and a dark part within an infinity to this life. And I think for us to experience the purest form of love, we at some point have to experience the darkest part of heartbreak. So we even have a comparison of and understand the difference and really able to appreciate that feeling in a way of empathy. And I think we go through these experiences so they could frame empathy within us. And as an infinite being, I think God both has free will and doesn't have free will. Because if you're infinite and you're perfect, then you're only going to operate in a perfect way. And I think by giving us, I think as a parent, if we think of God and Jesus as a parent and we're his children, then I think most parents would agree that one thing you want for your children is for them to have to grow beyond you. I don't think any parent wants their child to not overgrow them. I think most parents want their children to be better and more than they are. And I think God wants that for us too. And I think if you had to put yourself on the position of an infinite being that's perfect, how do you create something that's more than that? And I think one way you create something that's more than that is a being that's in the image of something perfect that also has free will. Because I think free will is one thing that you can give something that's perfect that will make them better than perfect, because now not only do they have the capacity to be godly, but they have the option to choose whether they want to come back to God or not. And I think that's probably one of the most difficult things God had to do, is to give us the option to choose to suffer and to choose to do that. And I think through this journey is how we ultimately grow our souls. And, you know, the thing I want to share is even the lowest moment of your life can bring out something good and something positive. And if this episode moved you, or if it impacted you, please share it with someone that you think could benefit from hearing this message, and one person who needs hope to know that they need to stick around. We have a lot more to uncover together, and I look forward to having you join me on the next episode of Real Talk with Real Taxpayers. Now go live awake, and if this shook something inside of you, share it with someone still sleepwalking.